She stood at the fence as the dogs paced behind it, and the first question crept into her mind before anyone said a word. Why were they smiling like this was entertainment? Cold mist rolled in from the Pacific, clinging to the chain link like breath on glass. Three shadows moved inside the pen, lean and restless. Nails scraped concrete. Teeth clicked. Hunger lived in the rhythm of their packing. 5 minutes, they'd said. 5 minutes to prove she belonged. Lieutenant Sloane Mercer didn't answer them. She didn't turn around. She watched the dogs instead, the way the largest one held his weight forward, the way the white-chested one circled patiently, the way the youngest never stopped moving, like stillness was dangerous. Behind her, someone laughed. Another voice muttered, "Rip that B*TCH apart." She heard it, she always heard everything. But fear had a smell, and she refused to give it to them. 72 hours earlier, this place hadn't felt inevitable. Shrike Point Naval Annex sat alone on a bluff north of San Diego, concrete and rust overlooking endless gray water. A place forgotten just enough to rot quietly. No banners, no welcome, just a handwritten sign taped to a shack door, "Report here." She'd driven 4 hours along Highway 1, ocean to her left, memories to her right. Iraq, Syria, rubble and heat, and a Belgian Malinois named Jericho who had saved 14 Marines because she'd finally learned to listen instead of command. This assignment was supposed to be paperwork, oversight, observation. But the dogs told a different story the moment she stepped out of her truck. Empty water bowls, underfed bodies, eyes that flinched instead of focused. Weapons, they called them. She called them partners. Chief Vance didn't like her from the moment he saw her, didn't like evaluators, didn't like women, didn't like anyone who wrote things down. "You treat them soft, they get you killed," he'd said. She didn't argue. Experience had taught her silence was sharper than defiance. Senior Chief Taggart Bull was different. 36 years in uniform, gravel voice, eyes tired with guilt. He noticed the empty bowls. He noticed the numbers didn't add up. 71% mission success. Below standard. Something here was broken. And broken things didn't stay quiet forever. The first time she saw Phantom punished for confusion, her jaw tightened so hard it hurt. The handler yanked the chain. The dog yelped, not in pain but in betrayal. That sound followed her into the night. That was when Bull warned her. "Don't take the test." She didn't understand yet. The test came on day 4. They walked her to the pen like a ceremony. Handlers gathered, smirks sharpened. The dogs were already inside, Kilo, Phantom, Nero. No protection, no commands, no handler intervention. 5 minutes, Vance said, survive it. Refusal meant losing access, losing truth, letting this place rot quietly forever. So she stepped inside. The gate locked behind her. The dogs stopped packing. Predators didn't rush, they assessed. Sloane breathed slowly, controlled, hands loose, eyes soft. Fear stayed locked away with memories of explosions and blood, and the weight of Jericho in her arms. Kilo growled. Phantom lunged, false charge testing. She didn't retreat. She knelt. The concrete was cold under her knees, palms open, neck exposed. Not submission. Acknowledgement. The growl died mid-breath. Silence spread like a held inhale. One dog approached, then another. She hummed low, steady, instinctive, a sound older than language. Nero stopped packing. He watched her like a ghost, deciding whether to exist. "I see you," she whispered. "You're safe." He stepped forward, then sat. 5 minutes passed without violence. When she stood and opened the gate, disbelief rippled through the yard. Kilo followed her out. Nero sat at her heel like he'd been waiting 4 years for permission. That was when the truth broke loose. Bull spoke. Havoc hadn't died in an accident. Files had been altered, reports destroyed, abuse hidden behind tradition. NCIS arrived before the dust settled. Chief Vance screamed, then went quiet. The dogs watched everything. They always did. The investigation took 8 days. 8 days of silence breaking. 8 days of guilt surfacing. 11 dogs examined. 11 stories of hunger and fear. Sloane stayed. She could have walked away with a commendation. She didn't. They offered her 60 days. Fix it or shut it down forever. She chose to fix it. Because Nero wouldn't eat unless she was there. Because Bull had waited 4 years for someone to go first. They rebuilt from nothing. Food, water, rest. 10-minute sessions instead of 2-hour punishments. Trust instead of dominance. Phantom learned joy again. Kilo healed. And Nero, slow, fragile, terrified Nero, took food from her hand on day 18. 4 treats. No biting. Just choice. On day 38, he ate from a bowl for the first time since his brother died. Bull cried. So did she. When the final evaluation came, the numbers spoke louder than medals ever could. Above standard. Sustainable. Human. Admiral Sinclair didn't smile often. She smiled then. The program stayed open. Bull retired with his conscience intact. The handlers learned a new language, one built on listening. Sloane packed her bag on day 60. Nero pressed his head against her leg. She knelt. I won't leave you broken, she whispered. He wagged his tail once. Just enough. As she walked toward the gate, the ocean light breaking through the fog, the lesson stayed with her, not just about dogs or power or abuse disguised as tradition, but about dignity. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the dogs go silent the moment she stepped inside the pen? No barking, no lunging, just the sound of breath, hers and theirs, measured, deliberate, heavy with something waiting to break. Outside the fence, no one spoke at first. The handlers had expected noise, violence, teeth. They'd seen this before. Men had gone in shaking and come out bleeding if they came out at all. Tradition, they called it, proof, a spectacle disguised as assessment. But Lieutenant Sloane Mercer knelt in the dirt like she had all the time in the world. Her palms were open, empty, her posture loose, not defiant, not collapsed. She let her shoulders drop, let the tension drain from places most people didn't even know they held tight. Years of combat had taught her what panic did to the body, how it betrayed you in micro-movements, how animals read it faster than humans ever could. Kilo stood closest, massive, scarred. His weight leaned forward, muscles coiled like cable. Phantom circled wider, smarter, his white chest flashing in and out of her peripheral vision. Nero stayed back, packing tight loops, eyes darting like he was trapped in a memory he couldn't escape. 5 minutes. That's all they'd given her. She didn't look at the fence, didn't look at the men. She let her breath slow until it found a rhythm that matched the dogs, not forcing calm but offering it. The first growl came from Kilo, low, testing. Sloane turned her head slightly, deliberately exposing the vulnerable line of her neck. Not weakness, language, acknowledgement of strength without challenge. The growl cut off like someone had flipped a switch. Confusion replaced aggression. Dogs were honest like that. Phantom made the first move. A sharp, fast feint, teeth bared, bark snapping the air. It was muscle memory, conditioning. Violence offered before understanding. Sloane didn't flinch. She adjusted her weight by inches. Not retreat, not advance, just awareness. Her body said, I see you, I am not prey. That mattered. 30 seconds gone. Outside the pen, someone muttered, what the hell is she doing? Bull stood rigid near the back of the crowd, hands clenched so tight his knuckles had gone pale. He'd seen this test end careers, end bodies, end dogs. He wanted to shout, to stop it, to pull her out before it was too late. But he also saw something else. Recognition. Sloane wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to dominate or impress. She was listening. Inside the pen, Nero stopped packing. That was the moment Sloane felt it, the shift. The way the air changed when an animal made a decision instead of reacting. Nero's eyes locked onto her, sharp and dark and painfully alert. Not hunger, not rage. Memory. She'd seen that look before. In mirrors. In Marines who survived blasts that killed everyone else. In dogs who'd learned that unpredictability was safer than hope. "I see you," she whispered, barely sound at all. "You don't have to choose yet." The words didn't matter, the tone did. Nero's ears tipped forward a fraction. 2 minutes gone. Kilo stepped closer. His nose hovered inches from her open palm. Sloane kept her breathing steady. She could feel her heart, but it didn't race. It stayed where she'd trained it to stay, in control, not denial. Kilo sniffed once, twice. Her scent told him more than her uniform ever could. No fear sweat, no adrenaline spike, no aggression, just presence. He exhaled. Sat. A ripple went through the crowd outside the fence. Someone swore under their breath. Phantom approached next, slower now, circling behind her. His muzzle brushed her shoulder, the back of her neck, the places predators went when they meant business. She hummed. Low, steady, a frequency that bypassed thought and went straight to instinct, a sound mothers used, a sound of safety older than training manuals and chain of command. Phantom froze. Then, like Kilo, he sat. 3 minutes. Only Nero remained standing. He took one step forward, then stopped. His body trembled, not with aggression but with restraint, with the effort of not running, not attacking, not dissociating. This was the moment that mattered. Sloane shifted her attention to him fully now, but gently, like turning toward a skittish animal in the wild. Her voice stayed low, almost inside her chest. "I won't make you," she said. "You get to choose." Nero stared at her, like the world was holding its breath. Then he walked forward. Not fast, not slow, deliberate. And when he sat, clean and absolute, something broke open in Bull's chest outside the fence. 5 minutes ended in silence. Sloane stood carefully, the same way she'd knelt, telegraphing every movement. The dogs didn't move. They watched her, waiting. She checked the latch on the gate, something she suspected most people never thought to do in their panic. It opened. She stepped out. Kilo followed. That was when the yard erupted, not with cheers but with disbelief, with the uneasy quiet that came when a belief system cracked. Chief Vance's smirk had vanished. His face looked tight, almost sick. "Test done," Sloane said quietly. Before Vance could respond, a voice from the crowd cut through. "I know her." All eyes turned. Shaw, one of the tech specialists, stepped forward, uncertainty etched across his face. "Marine Corps Ball Camp Pendleton, 2 years ago. You were the handler with the 3-legged dog, Navy Cross." The words landed hard. A metal like that changed the math of a room. Vance bristled. "Doesn't change how dogs work." Sloane looked at him then, really looked, at the anger, the exhaustion, the certainty that came from never questioning a system that rewarded cruelty. "Your dogs aren't failing because they're weak," she said. "They're failing because they're starving, confused, broken." Cross stepped forward, defensive. "You calling us abusers?" "I'm calling the methods flawed," Sloane replied. "There's a difference." Bull's voice carried from the edge of the crowd. "She's right." That silence was heavier than any bark. Bull stepped forward, spine straight for the first time in years. "Havoc didn't die in an accident." The words cracked something open that couldn't be sealed again. By the time NCIS arrived, the dogs had gone quiet in their kennels, like they sensed the shift in power, like they knew something old and rotten was being dragged into the light. That night Sloane stayed late. She sat outside Nero's run long after the compound had gone dark, the ocean wind carrying salt and distant surf. She didn't reach for him, didn't ask anything. She just stayed. Nero paced at first, then slowed, then lay down parallel to her on the other side of the fence, close enough to feel her presence without touching. Bull watched from a distance, chest tight. 4 years, he thought. 4 years and no one had sat with him like that. Sloane didn't know what the investigation would bring, didn't know if the program could be saved, didn't know what it would cost her career. But as Nero finally closed his eyes, breathing even and unafraid, one thing settled in her chest with quiet certainty. She wasn't leaving. Not yet. What happens when the shouting stops, but the damage does? The morning after the test, Shrike Point felt different, quieter, not peaceful, just stunned. Like a room after an argument so brutal no one remembers how to speak normally again. Sloane noticed it immediately when she stepped out of the admin shack before dawn. The fog sat low over the kennels, heavy and damp, mooting sound. No joking voices. No music from phones. Just boots on concrete and the restless movement of dogs who had learned not to expect much from mornings. She walked the rows slowly, hands in her jacket pockets, breathing in the mix of salt air and kennel musk. 11 runs. 11 lives balanced on decisions made by people who rarely had to look them in the eye. Kilo watched her approach, ears forward but loose. Phantom rose and sat without command. Nero stayed lying down, head lifted, eyes tracking her carefully, still unsure if consistency was real or just another phase before disappointment. She stopped at his gate. Didn't speak. Didn't reach. Just stood there. Behind her, Bull cleared his throat. "And Sis'll be here by noon." Sloane nodded. Good. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Chief Vance didn't sleep, packing his office all night. "That's not my concern," she said gently. Bull studied her face. He'd seen officers like her before, rare, dangerous to the system, impossible to ignore. The kind who didn't raise their voice, didn't posture, but somehow changed gravity in a room. "You okay?" he asked. She thought about the pen, about Nero's eyes, about how close everything had come to going very wrong. "I will be," she said, "after we feed them." That surprised him. Feed them. "Now," she said, already moving. Bull hesitated. Feeding time was scheduled for 600. It was barely 500. Protocol mattered here, or at least it pretended to. Then he remembered the empty bowls, the dust patterns, the math that didn't lie. He followed. They worked quietly, refilling bowls, measuring portions properly for the first time in years. Not guessing, not rounding down, doing the work the way it was supposed to be done. Some dogs ate immediately, heads down, desperate. Others hesitated, suspicious of abundance. Nero didn't move. Bull knelt, held out food in his hand. Nero came forward cautiously and ate. Sloane watched without comment, but something twisted in her chest. Control disguised as care had taught this dog that predictability lived only in human hands. That had to change. By mid-morning, the compound filled with unfamiliar energy. Black SUVs, plainclothes agents, clipboards and cameras, and people who asked questions without raising their voices. Special Agent Driscoll took the lead. She had eyes like cold water and a voice that didn't waste syllables. "Lieutenant Mercer," she said, extending a hand, "you're the one who opened this." "I documented what I observed," Sloane replied. Driscoll's mouth twitched. That's usually how it starts. They walked the kennels together. Sloane answered questions with facts, not emotion, feeding logs, injury patterns, behavioral markers. Driscoll listened closely, jotting notes. At Nero's run, she paused longer. This one, she said, what's his deal? Trauma, Sloane replied. Chronic stress, learned helplessness. Driscoll raised an eyebrow. You diagnose dogs now. I listened to them, Sloane said. That earned her a look not skeptical, curious. The interviews started after lunch. Handlers, one by one, ushered into the admin shack. Some talked too much. Some said nothing. Guilt leaked out in different ways, defensiveness, anger, shaking hands. Bull was called last. He sat across from Driscoll, spine straight, eyes tired. How long have you known something was wrong? She asked. Bull exhaled slowly. 4 years. And you didn't report it? No, he said quietly. I thought keeping them alive was enough. Driscoll didn't argue. She'd heard that before. Different context, same logic. Why now? She asked. Bull's eyes flicked to the window, toward the kennels. Because someone finally went into the cage and didn't break. The agent stayed late, evidence mounted, files resurfaced, old reports contradicted new ones. By evening, Vance was escorted out in cuffs. Sloane didn't watch. She was sitting on the concrete outside Nero's run, back against the fence, knees drawn up. No food this time, no agenda. Just presence. Nero paced for a while, then slowed. Eventually, he lay down parallel to her again, close but not touching. Bull watched from a distance, arms crossed. You're not supposed to get attached, he said when he finally approached. She didn't look up. I'm not attached, I'm consistent. He grunted, that's worse. She smiled faintly. The call came that night. Rear Admiral Sinclair's voice was crisp, efficient. You caused a mess. Yes, ma'am. A necessary one, Sinclair said. NCIS confirms enough for charges. The question now is what we do with the program. Sloane leaned her head back against the fence, eyes on the stars just starting to break through the fog. Shut it down or rebuild it. And your recommendation? Sloane thought about Kilo's healing ribs, Phantom's cracked teeth, Nero's refusal to eat from a bowl. Rebuild, she said, but only if it's done right. Silence stretched. We're offering you interim authority, Sinclair said finally. 60 days, full discretion. You either bring this program above standard or you recommend permanent closure. Sloane closed her eyes. 60 days. She could walk away, return to rotation, let this become another report filed and forgotten. Instead, she pictured Nero's careful steps toward her in the pen, the choice he'd made when no one forced him. I'll do it, she said. Bull found her still sitting there when the call ended. They give you the job, he said. Yes. He nodded slowly. Then you'll need help. I know. You planning to keep me? His voice was casual, but his eyes weren't. She looked at him then, really looked, at the man who'd stayed when leaving would have been easier, who'd fed a broken dog by hand for 4 years in silence. If you're willing, she said. Bull swallowed. I've got 75 days till retirement. Then we'd better not waste them. Something shifted in him at that. Relief, purpose, fear. They started the next morning. No ceremonies, no speeches. Just changes. Feeding schedules rewritten, water systems fixed, rest protocols enforced, training suspended. The handlers left, some transferred, some removed. 3 remained: Shaw, Walsh, Stone. Sloane gathered them in the yard. This place was broken, she said simply. We fix it or we shut it down. No shortcuts, no traditions that hurt more than they help. Walsh spoke first. What do you need from us? Honesty, Sloane replied, and patience. Stone asked the hard question. What if some of them can't be fixed? Sloane didn't dodge it. Then we give them peace, not work. That landed heavy. The vet arrived 2 days later. Civilian, experienced, blunt. Diagnoses confirmed what Sloane already knew. Kilo fractured rib, Phantom cracked molars, Nero, stress markers through the roof. Can he recover? Sloane asked about Nero. In theory, the vet said, with time and consistency. Sloane nodded. Then that's what he gets. The training changed. 10-minute sessions, positive reinforcement, clear markers, no yelling, no punishment. The dogs responded like they'd been waiting their whole lives. Phantom learned fastest. His tail wagged for the first time anyone could remember. Kilo rested, healed. Nero watched. Always watching. On day 18, Sloane brought food to his run. Not in a bowl. In her hand. She sat, waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Bull held his breath from across the yard. Finally, Nero stepped forward, took the treat without touching skin, backed away, returned. 4 treats. That night, Sloane cried quietly into her sleeve so no one would see. Bull sat beside her, saying nothing. Progress was slow, but it was real. And for the first time since she'd arrived at Shrike Point, Sloane felt something dangerous and fragile take root. Hoping. Sometimes the hardest battles don't involve enemies at all. Sometimes they involve staying long enough to prove you won't leave. What if healing wasn't the hardest part, but trusting that it would last? Day 23 began with rain. Not the dramatic kind that washed things clean. This was the slow, persistent drizzle that soaked into concrete and clothing and mood alike. The kind that tested patience. The kind that made everything feel heavier than it already was. Sloane welcomed it. Rain kept voices low, movements deliberate. It forced everyone to slow down, and slowing down was exactly what this place needed. She walked the kennels with a clipboard tucked under her arm, not because she needed it but because structure mattered. Dogs noticed patterns long before people did. Consistency wasn't kindness, it was safety. Kilo lay on his side, rib finally healing enough that he slept without tension. Phantom sat at the front of his run, tail thumping softly when she passed. Nero stood back, watching through the bars, ears alert, body still unsure whether progress was permanent or just another temporary mercy. She stopped at his run. He didn't retreat. That alone felt like a small miracle. You don't have to today, she said quietly, though no one else was around to hear. We can just exist. Nero blinked, stayed where he was. Bull joined her a moment later, rain darkening his jacket. NCIS wrapped up interviews last night. Sloane nodded. Charges. Enough to make examples, he said. Enough to scare people. Good, she said. Fear shouldn't belong to the dogs alone. Bull studied Nero. He's watching you like you're the weather. Sloane allowed herself a small smile. Then I'd better stay predictable. The call came mid-morning. Rear Admiral Sinclair again. They're watching, she said without preamble. Everyone is. Sloane didn't pretend not to know what that meant. We're on track. Some think you're being too soft. Sloane looked out at the yard, at Phantom learning to wait, at Kilo resting without pain, at Nero choosing stillness over panic. Then they don't understand strength, she said. A pause, then, you have 37 days. I know. When the call ended, Sloane felt it, the pressure, the invisible weight of expectation, results demanded on a timeline healing didn't respect. That night the past caught up with her. She dreamed of Jericho, of the blast, the dust, the sudden silence where sound should have been. She woke with her heart racing, the echo of lost tight in her chest. For a long moment she sat on the edge of her bunk, grounding herself in the present, the hum of the lights, the distant ocean, the fact that she was here, not there. She didn't go back to sleep. Instead, she walked. The kennels were quiet, dogs curled into themselves. When she reached Nero's run, she stopped. He was awake, watching her. Without thinking, she sat down on the cold concrete back against the fence. She didn't reach for him, didn't speak. She breathed. After a long while, Nero lay down again, closer to the front than he ever had at night. That was when Sloane realized something uncomfortable. She needed this as much as he did. The next week tested everything. A visiting inspection team arrived unannounced, clipboard energy, stiff uniforms, polite smiles sharpened by skepticism. They watched training sessions, watched handlers reward instead of correct, watched dogs rest instead of grind. One inspector leaned toward Sloane. "Where's the edge?" Sloane didn't hesitate. "Right where it belongs, controlled." Phantom executed a clean search pattern, focused and calm. Kilo followed commands without flinching. Nero stayed in his run, observing, not panicking. The inspectors took notes, faces unreadable. After they left, Sloane felt the adrenaline crash. She leaned against the wall, eyes closed, counting her breaths. Bull stood beside her. "You did good." "We did," she corrected. Day 31 brought a setback. Nero refused food again. Not dramatic, not regression into panic, just refusal. He lay at the back of the run, eyes dull, body closed. Sloane felt the familiar twist of fear, the kind that whispered, "You were wrong. This was always temporary." The vet checked him, no physical cause. "Psychological," she said, "stress, change can do that too." That night, Sloane sat outside his run longer than usual. "I know you're tired," she murmured. "So am I." No response. Bull watched her, worry etched deep. "You can't fix everything." She didn't look away from Nero. "I'm not trying to fix him, I'm trying to stay." On day 34, Nero ate again. From the bowl. No fanfare, no witnesses. Just a quiet choice made when no one was watching. Sloane exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for days. Word spread quietly through the base. Not rumors, results. Handlers from other units started visiting, asking questions, watching. Change moved slowly, but it moved. Day 40 arrived with sunlight. Clear, bright, unforgiving. Sloane gathered the remaining handlers and Bull in the yard. "We're not done," she said. "We may never be, but this is what right looks like." Stone nodded. "They're different." "They always were," Sloane replied. "We just had to let them be." That afternoon, Nero approached the gate when she arrived. Unprompted. He sat, tail still, eyes steady. Sloane knelt, careful not to rush the moment. She opened the gate. He didn't bolt. He stepped out. The yard seemed to hold its breath. Sloane stood slowly, giving him space. He followed at a distance, mirroring her movements, testing freedom without pressure. Bull's hands shook. Phantom watched, alert but calm. Kilo rested, unbothered. Nero stopped, looked around. Then lay down in the open. Not fleeing. Not frozen. At peace. Sloane felt tears burn her eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to break the moment with her own release. Freedom wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the ocean gold, Bull spoke what they were all thinking. "He's ready, isn't he?" Sloane looked at Nero, lying in the grass, ears flicking at distant sounds, alive in the present instead of trapped in memory. "Yes," she said softly, "but only if we don't rush him." Bull nodded. "We won't." The countdown continued. Pressure remained. But something fundamental had shifted. Not just in the dogs. In the people. Sloane lay in her bunk that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the cost of staying. The risk. The attachment she'd sworn never to repeat after Jericho. And yet, some bonds didn't weaken you. They reminded you why you endured. Outside, Nero slept under the stars for the first time in years. And for once, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a possibility. What happens when success attracts the wrong kind of attention? Day 43 arrived with helicopters. The sound rolled over Shrike Point before anyone saw them. Low, heavy, unmistakable. Not routine flyovers, not training noise. This was presence. Authority reminding everyone who ultimately owned the ground beneath their boots. Sloane stood in the yard, coffee cooling in her hand, eyes lifted to the sky. Nero sat a few feet away, unrestrained, watching her instead of the aircraft. That detail mattered more to her than the incoming brass. "They're early," Bull muttered beside her. "Of course they are," she said. 3 aircraft touched down beyond the perimeter. Dust lifted. Doors opened. Uniforms stepped out, pressed, decorated, distant from kennels and concrete. The kind of officers who talked about readiness in conference rooms. Rear Admiral Sinclair wasn't among them. That worried Sloane. Captain Hargreave took the lead, tall, confident, a smile that never reached his eyes. "Lieutenant Mercer," he said, shaking her hand, "heard you've been working miracles." Sloane met his gaze evenly. "I've been doing the work." He laughed lightly. "Modest, I like that." They toured the compound. Sloane narrated calmly, keeping emotion out of it, feeding protocols, training shifts, injury recovery metrics, behavioral improvements. The numbers were undeniable. Hargreave nodded along, but his eyes kept drifting to Nero lying in the open yard, free, uncontrolled by leash or command. "That one," he said, "problem case." "Recovery case," Sloane replied. "Still not operational." "Not yet." Hargreave smiled. "That's unfortunate." The word lingered. They moved to the observation platform. Phantom ran a search drill, clean, focused, precise. Kilo followed with calm strength. The handlers worked quietly, communicating more with body language than voice. "Impressive." But Hargreave didn't clap. He folded his arms. "You've created a very humane environment." Sloane waited. "War isn't humane," he continued. "We don't have the luxury of patience when lives are on the line." Bull stiffened beside her. "With respect, sir," Sloane said, "these dogs perform better when they trust us. That saves lives." Hargreave tilted his head. "Trust is fragile." "So is fear," Sloane replied. The captain's smile faded a fraction. That afternoon, Sloane received the message she'd been dreading. Demonstration. Day 45. They wanted proof, not data, not reports. A show. That night Sloane couldn't sleep. She sat outside Nero's run long after lights out, the weight in her chest heavy and familiar. This was the moment systems always failed people like her, when quiet progress met loud expectation. Bull joined her silently. "They want Nero," he said. She nodded. "They want a story," he continued. "Redemption, transformation, something to sell." Sloane swallowed. "He's not ready for spectacle." Bull's voice dropped. "They won't care." She stared at the fence, fingers curled around the cold metal. Memories surfaced, commanders pushing injured soldiers back into rotations, handlers forcing dogs into missions they weren't healed for. The cost always came later. "I won't do it," she said. Bull looked at her sharply. "They'll override you." "Then they'll have to do it without my name on it." Day 44 passed intense preparation. Sloane trained Nero gently, carefully, short sessions, familiar spaces, no pressure. He responded focused, present, but she could feel the edge, the uncertainty. He trusted her. That was the danger. The night before the demonstration, she made her decision. She called Admiral Sinclair. "They're going to break him," Sloane said bluntly. A pause, then a sigh. "I suspected. I won't put him out there." "You may not have a choice." "I always have a choice," Sloane replied. "So do you." Silence stretched. Finally Sinclair spoke. "What do you recommend?" Sloane's voice steadied. Cancel the demonstration or let me run it my way. And if the results disappoint? Sloane thought of Nero's steady eyes, of Jericho, of every cost paid quietly after applause faded. Then the program fails, she said, but it fails honestly. The demonstration morning dawned clear and sharp. The yard filled with observers, cameras, analysts. The pressure was palpable. Hargreave approached, expression neutral, ready to impress. Sloane met his gaze, ready to be accurate. Nero stood at her side, leash loose. He glanced up at her once. She knelt. "You don't owe them anything," she whispered. "Just stay with me." She stood and faced the crowd. "We're not running a combat simulation," she announced. "We're running a trust evaluation." Murmurs rippled. Hargreave frowned. "Lieutenant." "This dog is not a tool," Sloane continued calmly. "He's a partner in recovery. Today isn't about proving force. It's about proving restraint." She unclipped the leash. Gasps. Nero didn't move. Sloane walked forward alone, stopping 10 paces out. "Nero," she said softly, "come if you want." The yard went silent. Seconds stretched. Nero looked at the crowd, the equipment, the unfamiliar faces. Then he looked at her. He stood. Walked. Not fast, not slow. Deliberate. He stopped beside her and sat. Sloane felt her breath hitch, but she didn't touch him. "Stay," she said. He did. She stepped away. He stayed. Trust without compulsion. The observers shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the story they'd come for. Sloane returned and knelt, pressing her forehead briefly to his. "That's enough," she said. Hargreave stepped forward, jaw tight. "That proves nothing." Sloane stood. "It proves everything." The silence that followed wasn't disappointment. It was recognition. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Bull let out a shaky breath. "You just bet everything." Sloane watched Nero roll onto his side in the grass, relaxed, alive in the moment. "Yes," she said, "and so did he." The consequences would come, she knew that. But as the sun dipped low and the compound returned to its quieter rhythm, one truth settled deep in her chest. Sometimes leadership isn't about showing strength. It's about protecting it, even when the cost is yours. What happens after the cameras leave, but the choices remain. Day 49 felt almost anticlimactic. No helicopters, no visitors, just the wind off the ocean and the quiet routines that had slowly replaced chaos. Shrike Point breathed differently now, like a place that had survived an illness and was learning how to live again without flinching at every symptom. Sloane stood by the fence at sunrise, coffee untouched in her hands. Nero lay nearby, half in shadow, half in light, ears flicking as gulls cried overhead. He didn't watch the horizon anymore. He watched her. That trust still scared her. Bull approached, slower these days, like he was savoring his last weeks instead of counting them down. "Message came in early," he said. She didn't turn. "From who?" "Sinclair." Sloane exhaled, and Bull smiled, small, careful. "Program review finalized, above standard, permanently funded." The words landed softly. No rush of triumph, just relief deep and bone level. "And you?" Sloane asked. Bull shrugged. "Retirement stands, but they offered me a consulting role. Civilian, my terms." She nodded. "You earned that." He hesitated. "They offered you something too." She finally turned to look at him. "I figured." "Training command," Bull said. "Policy level, big reach." Sloane glanced at Nero, at Phantom and Kilo resting nearby, at the handlers moving through the yard with quiet confidence instead of rigid fear. "When?" she asked. "Immediate," Bull replied. "They want your voice higher up." She nodded slowly. She known this moment would come. Systems didn't like anomalies for long. They either crushed them or promoted them out of reach. That night she sat with Nero longer than usual. "You'll be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince. Nero pressed his head gently against her knee. The next days were filled with endings disguised as paperwork. Handlers reassigned, new staff briefed, protocols locked in place so they couldn't be quietly undone when no one was watching. Sloane made sure of that. On day 55, she walked the kennels one last time. Phantom met her at the gate, tail high. Kilo watched from his spot, content. Nero approached calmly, eyes steady, no trace of the frantic packing that had once defined him. She knelt and rested her forehead against his. "You did good," she murmured. He licked her cheek once, quick and unceremonious. Bull watched from a distance, hands in his pockets, eyes wet but unashamed. "He's ready," Bull said softly, "for real work, the right kind." She nodded, "with the right handler." Bull smiled, "Already arranged." The transfer ceremony was quiet. No speeches, no applause, just signatures and nods and the kind of respect that didn't need witnesses. When Sloane packed her truck, the fog rolled in thick and low, wrapping the compound in soft gray. She paused at the gate, taking one last look. This place had almost broken her. Instead, it had reminded her who she was. Bull extended his hand. She shook it, then pulled him into a brief, fierce hug. "Don't let them forget," she said. He nodded, "I won't." Nero was loaded last. He hesitated at the vehicle, then turned back toward Sloane. For a moment, old fear flickered. What if this was too much change, too fast? She knelt. "You're not being left," she said quietly. "You're being trusted." He studied her, then stepped forward into the vehicle without resistance. The gate closed. The engine started. Sloane watched until the vehicle disappeared into the fog. Her orders took her north, then east. Meetings, policies, rooms filled with people who nodded thoughtfully and took notes and promised change. Some of it stuck. Some of it didn't. But enough did. Months later, a message arrived. A photo. Nero in full harness, calm and focused, standing beside a new handler. The caption was short. "First deployment, saved 2 lives, came home wagging." Sloane stared at the image longer than she needed to. She thought about the pen, the hunger, the voices that had laughed. She thought about the choice to kneel instead of fight. The choice to stay. That night she stood alone on a different coast, the wind cold against her face, the ocean just as endless. She thought about all the places like Shrike Point that still existed, all the quiet suffering justified by tradition, all the moments when power confused cruelty with strength. She knew she couldn't fix them all, but she'd fixed one, and sometimes that was enough. Sloane turned away from the water and walked back toward the light. Behind her the waves kept moving, constant, patient, unstoppable. Just like dignity. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout or demand or prove itself under fire. Sometimes dignity kneels. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes it simply acts.